I think people take each other for granted. We're polite to each other too. We say please and thank you.
Okay.
And it might seem unnecessary when you've been married, 50 plus years.
Yeah.
But we just make sure, that's respect. And we're friends. We're not, we not only love each other, we like each other.
Yeah.
That's important to a marriage.
I am Greg Smalley. I help give leadership to the marriage department here, focus on the family, get the privilege with my wife, Erin. We lead a podcast called Crazy Little Thing Called Marriage, as well as we get to speak around the country. So we're passionate about marriage, and that's why I'm excited today to have a good friend, Jerry Jenkins, who's the author of Hedges. So really 7 ways to love your wife and to protect your marriage. And I know that you wrote this book about 35 years ago, and you're now coming out with a new version. So we can't wait to hear more about what you've learned and how to encourage us as men to really love our wives, to protect our marriage. But first of all, just thank you for being here today.
Great to be with you. Appreciate it.
Well, maybe let's start with why Hedges? What was maybe the passion for you behind this?
I have a younger brother who's about 10 years younger than I am. And when he got married several years ago, he asked me, when I get married, will I stop looking at other women? And I said,
it all stops,
right?
The
blinders are grown. And
exactly.
That's it. You're the way you were wired, you're no longer wired that way.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I wish.
Yeah.
And I said, no, you're going to have to be proactive about following your wedding vow. And, one of the interesting things I think about wedding vows is they're said in Elizabethan English, keep thee unto myself for as long as, and you wonder if they even know what they're saying. And so when people fail, I like to remind them, you made this vow. Where you want to start, if you're going to fix this, you're going to acknowledge that you broke your vow. And I wish a pastor, when they say those words, would also say, now, do you realize what you've just said?
Yeah.
And put it in everyday English. Now, people would say, well, that's crass. But I'd love to hear a pastor say, okay, you just promised that you won't sleep with anybody else as long as you both shall live.
Right.
That would make me remember my vow.
Right. Because it's serious. And to your point, actually, there was a time where we walked the traditional wedding vows around here at Focus on the Family, just being curious. Hey, when it says that I take you to be my wedded, like asking, what are those words, phrases even mean? It's interesting how very few people actually knew that, something that we all really said and stood up at the altar.
It all just becomes part of the formality.
Yeah, right.
We've got boutonnieres, we've got the rings, we've got the march, we've got the music, we've got these vows we say. What are you saying?
Yeah.
And are you, you made a sacred vow before God and man and your spouse. Are you fulfilling your vow?
Yeah. So define Hedges. So what does that really mean? What does that look like practically?
Yeah, I was telling my brother that you want to plant a hedge of protection around your eyes, your mind, your heart, your hands, and because you will still notice other women, and but your thought life has to change. You are devoted exclusively to your spouse now for as long as you both shall live. And you have to take action. It's not just going to be something natural. And it's interesting, I mention in the book, my 7 hedges, which is really kind of a vulnerable thing to do because my hedges won't necessarily be your hedges.
Yeah.
You may not need some of the ones I have, and I may not need some of the ones that you have. What it does is it exposes our weakness when we publicize our hedges. I have a hedge against traveling, meeting, dining with a woman alone who's not a relative. And that has caused embarrassment in the past. Sometimes, if I go to speak somewhere and they say, oh, so-and-so will pick you up and it's a woman.
Yeah.
I say, I need it to either be 2 women or add a man or just a man. And they go, really? What's the problem here? And I have to explain, it's just my policy.
Yeah.
And Yeah, it can be embarrassing, but
Well, put you on like the defensive. Like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah,
what have you done that requires
and what
such
are you
a
saying
hedge?
about this person who's going to pick you up? But I would say I'll trade that embarrassment, that awkwardness, for 53 years of marriage any day.
Yeah. What would you say? Which of those hedges? Because I like how you kind of it's a more of a wholehearted, kind of like the greatest commandment: mind, emotions, spiritually, physically. Which hedge area of those hedges has been the most important for you, or even maybe the hardest one for you?
It could be that first one. It's often referred to as the Billy Graham rule. He had the same rule. Um, and, I appreciate people. I appreciate women. I have important women in my life. I have dear friends. And if I was alone with them, I could see becoming enamored, becoming more impressed, wanting to impress them, make them laugh, maybe be flirtatious. I know better. I know I shouldn't do that. And so that hedge makes me take care of how things look. So I don't think I would, I have no intention of breaking my wedding vows, and neither would the person I'm talking about or the people I'm talking about. But if I take care of how things look, I take care of how they are.
Yeah.
And when it's a stranger especially, the last thing you want is for somebody to go, oh, tell your wife, I saw your husband with so-and-so. If she doesn't know about it, it didn't happen. And there would be a reason that, that it was somebody outside of that hedge. And I just wouldn't do it. But I have heard stories. In fact, I have a friend who's an evangelist. When he was young, he had a big evangelistic service. Lots of kids came forward. He was counseling them in the prayer room. And one by one, they left. And then he was left with a young woman from the church. And she made a pass of him. And he said, oh, I'm sorry. This is off the table. I'm not interested. I'm married, and, this is wrong. And of course, she was humiliated. She ran out and said that he had made the pass at her.
Yeah.
How does he counter that?
Yeah.
Who's going to believe who?
Right.
And so they shut down the meetings. The pastor, the elders got together, and they, confronted him. And he said, I'm happy to be confronted. She needs to be here. So she comes with her parents. They're all upset and everything. And he just said to her, you need to tell the truth, because this will ruin my ministry forever. This is it for me.
Yeah, right.
And you know the truth. And she broke down and told the truth. But if she hadn't, we've seen it. And how can you ever counter it? I would tend to believe the girl myself.
Yeah.
That's how it goes, I know how men think and all that everything. So take care of how things look, and you take care of how they are.
That's good. I know for me, probably the hedge in my life that I really have to work on is just that mental, because it's easy for me to justify, it just either, I looked too long at another woman or whatever that might look like, because it's so secretive.
Yeah.
Aaron wouldn't know that I'm having that thought or gazing,
Right.
too long in someone's direction, those kinds. But I know for me, that's kind of been the one that's the hardest.
Yeah.
And I remember one time I went on a work trip, 2 other guys, so colleagues, and I just asked them, hey, what's been one of the biggest struggles in your marriage? And as we got talking, pornography came up. And it kind of went into this what's almost like a secret that you really have never told your wife about, but kind of within that area you really struggle with. Well, one of the guys ends up telling his wife, "Wow, we had this great conversation. It was so authentic, and it's just guys. It was nice to know I'm not the only one that struggles." So then my wife, Erin, says, "So what exactly did you share during that?" And I remember that horrifying thought of going, I don't want to tell her every little thought that I struggle with.
Right.
But that turned out to be one of the best conversations that we've ever had, being able to talk real openly and honestly.
Yeah.
Kind of about those struggles. But how, so mentally, because I know that that's a struggle for so many men, kind of what's your advice?
Yeah, I think that's important too. And to me, accountability is the key.
Yeah.
I have an accountability board. There's 3 other guys. And I urge them to ask me hard questions, hold me accountable. I think too, in the area of pornography, we can so easily justify. Like, you know better than to look for it, but it can come unawares on your phone.
Out of nowhere, yeah.
And you say, well, I didn't ask for this, but here it is. So I'll take a peek, and I'm curious, and we're sort of drawn to this.
Right.
Then you feel the shame and the regret and all that type of thing.
If you're traveling, you're tired, worn out, whatever. I mean,
all kinds of justification.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's where you need to plant a hedge and say, I'm not going to do this, and I'm going to, I know some people, they'll actually take a picture, like a head of Christ picture, some famous picture or something like that, and put it on the desk in the hotel room.
Yeah.
And say, all right, God is always with me.
Picture of your family, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and you probably know Robert Wolgemuth.
Yeah.
He takes a picture of his wife and his daughters with him on trips. And if he winds up in an airplane sitting next to an attractive woman and they're chatting and seeming to hit it off, the first thing he does is pull that out and say, let me tell you about my wife and my kids.
Yeah.
And that shuts anything down. If you're trying to justify something, that'll do it.
Yeah. So you first wrote Hedges 35 years ago. So if you've been married, 53 years, what would you say kind of between when you first wrote that and thinking about now the new edition, what's changed? What are new insights? What maybe you didn't even think you had to address 35 years ago?
Well, part of it is the technology.
Yeah.
I mean, 35 years ago, the big thing was avoid adult theaters.
Right.
They had these theaters where you could sneak in and see, what.
Right. Or the magazine rack at the convenience store. Yeah.
That was sort of it. And sometimes people's hedges were automatic. It was like, if I ever got caught in a place like that, it would be the end of everything.
Right.
So that, and even though that may not be the best reason not to do it, it worked, but nowadays it's pervasive and it's everywhere. And so I try to plant, it was interesting. My original subtitle for this was Hedges for the 21st Century, because, there's so much that's new in 35 years. I was writing about all I kept mentioning, this new century and 21st century. And an editor from Tyndale wrote to me and she said, is this still a new century? And I realized she's probably born in the 90s. That's not, this is her century,
Right.
And so I had to adjust some of that stuff. Sadly, a lot of the stuff is not brand new. Right. I mean, I did write it new and the resources are new. The research and the statistics, and they're worse than they were 35 years ago.
Yeah.
It's sad that this is more needed now than ever. You'd think we'd have learned and maybe, come through this.
Because so much can be done in private. Yeah. I mean, that's your point. You would have had to have gone to a theater or gone and asked the convenience clerk to grab that magazine for you. I mean, now it's just so readily available, so easily discoverable, even accidentally, or it's pushed your way.
That's the big thing. And I found that the research shows that so many more people are tempted and more involved. Now, one of the things, you'd think that somebody who's visible in ministry, and this isn't a book necessarily for Christian leaders. You could do a whole book on the Christian leaders who've fallen.
Right.
But I'm not a theologian. I'm not a scholar. I'm not ordained. I'm not a counselor. I'm a fellow struggler. So I'm just saying, as a layperson, I've figured out ways to build these hedges that show what my weaknesses are.
Yeah.
I'm careful how I speak to women. I'm careful how I embrace women. I like to tell my love story. I think that's a good hedge. Remember,
Yeah.
And
you got your ring on. Yeah. Right? All of that. Yeah.
And remind your wife that you're still fulfilling your vow and that you remember what you said and what it is. But I would have thought at my age, I would have matured enough to say, oh, that's beneath me now, and I've got that covered.
Yeah.
I still need hedges, and I plant them. And as I say, my hedges won't be yours. Yours may not be mine. You may only need 1 or 2. You might need 10. I don't know. And when you publicize them, it makes you vulnerable because it exposes your weaknesses.
That's right. Yeah. It's so true because, and again, part of your message is how are we not only, you know, building that relationship with our wife, but how are we protecting not only the marriage, but even our wife within the relationship. Well, Jerry, as we're talking about just protecting our relationships, creating hedges, part of that is just continuing to grow, making sure that our mindset is, boy, what am I doing to grow? And we've got a great tool here, Focus on the Family. It's a marriage assessment, and it's going to help show you kind of 12 areas within your relationship, your strengths, as well as some growth areas. So, that's a great tool just to help couples keep moving forward within their relationship. So we encourage you, click the link below, take that marriage assessment. It's going to show you again where you're strong and then where you can grow and put effort and energy into those growth areas. And that is how you can create protection within your relationship. As you're thinking about your 53 years of marriage, well, what are some of the ways that you've learned to really protect her within your marriage?
Well, I think it's important that she know that these hedges are a gift of love to her.
Okay.
And I try to tell, I've got things in there too for people who are not yet married, talking about how you want to save yourself and her for your future spouse, whether or not that person you're in love with is your future spouse. Even if it's her, save that virginity for her. That's a gift to her as well.
It's true.
And I had a great example. My own parents were married, well over 50 years before they passed. And they loved each other. They didn't raise their voices to each other. My father, he didn't formalize it, but he had hedges too, that I recognized. And I want this to be my legacy to my own kids. My oldest two sons are married and have great marriages, and they are also planning hedges to give these as a gift to their wife, and that honors your spouse. And if your wife sees these as a gift, she'll really be warmed and encouraged.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love thinking about my dad. You guys were good friends. You knew each other. Gary Smalley, he went to be with the Lord back in 2016. And exactly what you were saying, we would have those conversations about his legacy. Part of his legacy to us, his kids, were the hedges really that he put in place within his relationship as well. And we'd talk about those things.
That's great.
Like what I so appreciated, one of those hedges, we would, do marriage events, and my dad snored. And it was very obnoxious, and it was hard to sleep in the same rooms. I was always like, Mom, I don't even know how, you're a saint. Like, I don't know how you do this. But he would always have one of us stay with him in his hotel room. And, he could have had his big old room to himself, bathroom to himself, all that. But that was a part for him of just going, that's a part of the hedge that I want within my marriage is I want, I'm tired, I'm worn out, I'm poured out. I want, one of either a close friend or even one of my sons with him. I've done the same thing. So fortunately, my wife and I get to travel together doing marriage events. So that's a part of the hedge we have. But if she can't come, then I always bring one of my kids. Yeah. And I pay for that. Yeah. And I pay for those tickets, and yet that's just a part of it. I want to feel safe and protected, and want to protect my marriage in that way.
That's great.
So that's been helpful. This is a book to men. Why just a book to men? Why not, because I'm assuming both men and women need hedges.
They do. And a lot of women have read the book and give it to their kids or give it to their husbands.
Yeah, I
bet. I only say that and put that subtitle about protecting your, loving your wife and protecting your marriage, because I don't pretend to speak for women.
Gotcha.
They do need hedges. My wife has, similar hedges to mine.
But she can write that book.
Yeah, she can write that book. And there are some good books by women out there about barriers and things like that. But that's really the reason, is just that I have seen books that try to cover both. And I've seen, even my wife has read those books and say, this guy doesn't get it on the women's side, and
That's fair.
I wouldn't either.
Yeah. What would be then, what's kind of your favorite tip that you would give to husbands? I remember being at a party when maybe I was 6 months married, talking to a guy who had been married over 50 years and asked him the same question, like, all right, been married 6 months, what's your one thing? And what he said, I was so not expecting. And it's been one of my very favorite pieces of advice I've ever heard. And he said, I never let my wife leave our home without complimenting her, because I don't want the first compliment that she hears to come from another man.
Interesting.
And it really though struck me as a young husband going, yeah, that's true. I want my wife so used to hearing compliments that when another guy might do that, she's like, yeah, well, thank you, whatever.
Yeah.
And so what about for you? What are some of those big pieces of advice being married 53 years?
Yeah, the big ones are small ones, like you just mentioned.
Yeah.
One thing is we're on slightly different sleep schedules. I'm up at crack of dawn and I'm writing till noon, that type of thing.
A morning person.
Yeah. And, she's a farm girl, but she has trouble sleeping and stuff like that. So she gets up a little later. And I don't go out to my office to work until she's up. And when she gets up, I greet her we embrace. And, it's like, I let her know that I'm glad she's the one that's waking up and, I get to see her. And
I'm glad you're still alive.
Right,
yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, I go to bed first. And we always kiss goodnight and tell each other we love each other.
Yeah.
Those are really minor little things.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah.
In fact, you go out to a restaurant and see people that are, clearly married. They're both on their phone. They're both, or they're just looking elsewhere.
Yeah. Or in bed, like you're saying at night, both phones, right? Yeah. We miss those opportunities.
And I think people take each other for granted. We're polite to each other too. We say please and thank you.
Okay.
And it can get to be old hat where if you're up, and you're getting a drink of water, you can ask them, what do you want? But then I've seen people do a lot of that without the pleasantries. And it might seem unnecessary when you've been married, 50 plus years.
Yeah.
But we just make sure, that's respect. And we're friends. We're not, we not only love each other, we like each other.
Yeah.
That's important to a marriage.
That is a big one. I always tell my wife, I know you're going to tell me that you love me and that thank you, but I would much rather her say that she likes me, because what that implies is that she considers us best friends. Like she wants to be around me versus, well, I know she has to love me because she stood at the altar, right?
Right.
So I love that. And then the how you greet each other in the morning, how you say goodnight to each other at the end of the day. What I love about that is you're creating these daily kind of rituals that then have meaning.
They do.
That's, how you say goodbye in the morning or even greet each other in the morning. That you're setting then a positive tone for the rest of the day. That's really the feeling that she's going to hold if you guys are going your separate ways. And I like the one, especially at night, I argue, what is it like? We have 1,400 and whatever minutes every day. And not all those minutes, would need to be protected because they're sacred. Like they can add to the relationship or strengthen your connection, whatever it is. But laying in bed, at night, that moment before you guys kind of settle in, even if one of you's going to bed quicker. And we always tell couples, even because my wife's the same way as your wife, like they stay up, she stays up way later. I get to bed a little bit earlier, but we start off in bed together for that very reason. That's when you can catch up and that you create that ritual, that expectation, and it does, it strengthens. Those are great tips.
I think it's good too to let your wife know that you remember your vows. And on any special occasion, if I'm writing her a card, the cards all have great sentiments anyway. And then you put all my love forever and that type of thing. And then I might just put, I'm still keeping you only unto me for as long as we both shall live. I said it. I believe it. I'm doing it. even all these years later.
Yeah, I love that. One of my very favorite questions when we do a podcast, my wife and I, we always ask our guests, if you could go back. So for you, 53 years, you're there at the altar. Well, what advice would you give your younger self on marriage and being a husband?
Well, I had a great example with my parents, and she did with hers too. And I actually got some really good advice from the pastor that day. When you remember what your pastor said at your wedding, 53 years,
yeah,
it's important.
Yeah, that'll preach.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever it was.
He was saying, if I'm in a board meeting and I feel put upon by the board and, they're not happy with me, if I'm happy at home, I'm okay. If she's not happy with me and I go to the board meeting and they tell me I'm the greatest preacher ever and they give me a raise, I'm not happy until she's happy.
True.
And I kept that with me. And I really try to tell my kids and anybody who wants to know, your job as a husband every day is to make her day. Whatever that means. How do you make her happy? How do you fix her problems?
Yeah.
And sometimes,
how do you leave her better than the morning
exactly
when you found her?
And sometimes it's not fixing the problem either. It's, she'll say, here's this terrible thing that happened today and I don't know what to do about it. They don't want an answer. They want you to listen and hear it.
They want you to care.
And care.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, and maybe Jesus modeled that when Lazarus' family, after Lazarus died, they're weeping. He knew how he was going to fix and solve the death of Lazarus by raising him. So instead of him saying, hey, just everybody calm down, watch what I'm going to do to fix this, he wept with them, to your point.
Yeah.
He was willing to enter into their world and hurt with them. And you're right. I think our wives love it when we just make our goal to care versus to fix. Great advice. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the wonderful work you've done. Thank you for using your 53-year marriage to really impart these important hedges that are good to think about and make sure that we're doing those things in our marriage. So thank you.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.